Welcome, story lovers, to a tale of an unlikely friendship that blossomed in the most unexpected of places. This is the story of Tim and Zip, and it all begins in a quiet little town nestled beside a vast, ancient forest. Tim was a boy with a heart full of curiosity and a backpack always ready for an adventure. He wasn't the loudest kid in class or the fastest on the playground. Instead, you'd find him with his nose buried in books about forgotten lands and mythical creatures. He dreamed of quests and mysteries, of worlds just beyond the edge of his town's map. His bedroom walls were covered not with posters of rock stars, but with hand-drawn maps of the whispering woods, the sprawling forest that bordered his home. He'd charted every known path, every stream, and every peculiar-looking tree. But he always felt something was missing, companion to share his discoveries with. One sunny afternoon, while exploring a part of the woods he'd never ventured into before, Tim heard a faint rustling in the bushes. He stopped, his heart thumping with a mix of fear and excitement. Was it a grumpy badger? A shy deer? He crouched down, peering through the leaves, and that's when he saw it. A small, metallic creature, no bigger than his hand, was tangled in a thorny vine. It had shimmering silver skin, large, expressive blue eyes, and two little antennae that flickered with a soft, pulsing light. It wasn't an animal. It looked like a tiny robot, lost and in trouble. Carefully, Tim approached. The little robot whirred and beeped, its blue eyes wide with alarm. "Hey there, little guy," Tim said softly, holding out his hand. "Don't be scared. I'm just here to help." He gently worked to untangle the vines, his fingers nimble and careful. Once free, the robot zipped around his head in a happy circle, letting out a series of cheerful chirps. It landed on his shoulder and nudged his cheek. "Wow," Tim breathed. "You're fast. I think I'll call you Zip." The robot beeped in agreement, its antennae glowing brightly. From that moment on, Tim's solitary adventures were over. He finally had a friend. Their first real adventure together began a few days later. While organizing his collection of old maps, Tim found one he'd never seen before. It was tucked inside a dusty book he'd bought at a flea market. The map was old, drawn on brittle parchment, and it depicted a part of the whispering woods labeled the Sunken Grove. At its center was a drawing of a crystal that glowed like the sun. The legend beneath it read, "The Sunstone of Eldoria, source of light and life." Tim's eyes widened. This was it, a real quest. He showed the map to Zip, who buzzed with excitement, its antennae twitching. "We have to find it, Zip," Tim declared. The next morning, with a backpack filled with sandwiches, a compass, and a water bottle, they set off. Zip perched on Tim's shoulder, acting as a tiny, beeping co-pilot. The map led them deeper into the forest than Tim had ever gone before. The familiar chirping of birds was replaced by the hooting of unseen creatures, and the trees grew so tall and thick that their leaves formed a canopy, blocking out the sun. It was both thrilling and a little spooky. According to the map, they had to cross the gurgling gorge. When they arrived, they found that the gorge was actually a wide, fast-flowing river, and the old rope bridge shone on the map was gone. All that remained were a few frayed ropes dangling from the other side. "Uh-oh," Tim said. looking at the churning water. How are we going to get across? He sat on a rock, feeling a bit defeated. But Zip wasn't ready to give up. It zipped off Tim's shoulder and flew over the river, its little body a silver blur. Bit examined the far bank, then came back, beeping and pointing with one of its tiny metallic arms towards a huge fallen log that stretched most of the way across, just a few 100 feet upstream. Of course, Tim exclaimed. A natural bridge. Great idea. Zip. They scrambled over to the log. It was slippery with moss, and Tim had to balance carefully, holding onto branches for support. Zip hovered beside him, chirping encouragement. Halfway across, Tim's foot slipped. He yelped, windmilling his arms. Just as he was about to fall, Zip zipped in front of him, pushing against his chest with all its might. It wasn't much, but it was just enough to help Tim regain his balance. He scrambled the rest of the way across, his heart pounding. "Thanks, Zip," he panted, patting the little robot. "You saved me." Their next challenge, as marked on the map, was the Whispering Labyrinth, a confusing maze of towering rock formations that all looked the same. The air here was strangely quiet, and the only sound was a soft, whispering wind that seemed to play tricks on their ears. Tim tried using his compass, but the needle spun wildly. "There must be some kind of magnetic interference here," he muttered, frustrated. They wandered for what felt like hours, passing the same twisted tree 3 times. They were lost. Just as Tim was about to suggest turning back, Zip's antennae began to glow with a steady, pulsing light. It flew up high, above the rocks, and started beeping in a rhythmic pattern. It was a code. Beep, boop, left, boop, beep, right. Tim realized Zip was creating a path for them from above, using its internal sensors to navigate where the compass had failed. Following Zip's directions, they twisted and turned through the maze, the whispering sounds fading behind them as they finally emerged into a clearing. They had made it through. They were exhausted but triumphant. According to the map, the sunken grove was just ahead. They pushed through a final curtain of thick vines and gasped. It was a hidden valley, sunk deep into the earth, filled with plants that glowed with a soft, internal light. It was the most beautiful place Tim had ever seen, and in the very center, resting on a pedestal of moss-covered stone, was the Sunstone. It was a crystal pulsating with a warm, golden light, casting dancing shadows all around the grove. It was real. As Tim and Zip approached the stone, a low growl echoed through the grove. From behind the pedestal, a large, shadowy creature emerged. It looked like a wolf made of twisted branches and dark moss, with glowing red eyes. It was the guardian of the stone. It snarled, barring their path. Tim froze, his hand instinctively going to Zip on his shoulder. He had no weapons, no way to fight a creature like this. This was where their adventure would end. But Zip wasn't afraid. It flew off Tim's shoulder and hovered between him and the creature. It started to emit a series of soft, melodic tones, not the usual beeps and chirps, but a calming, musical sequence. Its blue eyes pulsed in time with the music. The creature paused, its growls softening to a confused rumble. The red glow in its eyes flickered. Zip continued its song, a lullaby of gentle electronic notes that filled the grove. The moss wolf slowly lay down, its head on its paws, its red eyes dimming until they closed. It was asleep. Tim stared in amazement. Zip hadn't fought the guardian. It had soothed it. He slowly walked past the sleeping creature and stood before the sunstone. He reached out and gently touched its smooth, warm surface. The moment he did, a wave of light washed over the grove, making the glowing plants shine even brighter. A feeling of peace and happiness washed over him. He hadn't come to take the stone, only to see it, to prove that the legends were true. He looked at Zip, who was now perched back on his shoulder, and smiled. "We did it, Zip," he whispered. "We really did it. They didn't take the sunstone. They knew it belonged there, in its grove, protected by its guardian. Their reward wasn't the crystal itself, but the journey they had shared to find it. The journey back was much easier, with the memory of the path fresh in their minds, and a new sense of confidence. They navigated the labyrinth and crossed the river with ease. When they finally stepped out of the whispering woods and back into the familiar sunshine of their town, Tim felt different. He was no longer just a boy who read about adventures. He was a boy who lived them, and he wasn't alone anymore. He had Zipped his brave, clever, and loyal friend. He knew this was just the first of many adventures they would have together. The world was full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, from the sunken grove to whatever lay beyond the next page of his old, dusty maps. And with Zip by his side, Tim was ready for anything. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey with Tim and Zip. If you enjoyed their story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing adventures. We'll see you next time.